Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Zoom with the principal. We only have two more after this. We have one next week and then the following week, the very last week of school, which is finals week. Have one because I will be doing graduation practice at this time Wednesday morning. So we won't have one that last week of school during finals. If you notice my different background this morning, I am home this morning doing this because I have to take my son to the doctor, and you guys all as parents know that doctor's appointments are always at the most inconvenient times. So we just got to make it work. But thank you for joining me today. You may see my dog running around in the background. Ignore him, he's fine. Hopefully he won't start barking. So today our topic, I'm actually really excited about this topic today. We're going to talk about siblings. A couple of weeks ago, a parent sent me an email asking if we had any back videos of when we had talked about siblings. And it's like, we've actually never done that topic. And Yvonne and I started talking about everything that we could talk about with this topic, and there's just so much to talk about. I have a quote for you guys that I found yesterday about siblings that I think just sums up the sibling relationship so perfect. Siblings are the people we practice on, the people who teach us about fairness and cooperation and kindness and caring, quite often the hard way. And I have a younger brother. He is about 22 months younger than I am. And I don't have an easy relationship with him. We, as kids, we were the type of siblings that fought constantly, probably drove my parents crazy. As adults, we've had periods where we've been closer, and we've had periods where we just have gotten very angry with each other and don't speak. My brother is the person in the world that can make me the most angry. Like nobody in the planet can make me as angry as my brother can. So I want to ask my two friends here with me, Rupert and Yvonne, who wants to go first? Do you have siblings? What's your relationship like with your siblings?
I'll go. So I have two sisters. When I think I was like 7, my parents adopted my sister, who was my cousin. And she was 2 when she came to our house. And I was so mad. The first thing she did was she walked into my room and she took every one of my crayons and cracked them in half. That was like my first meeting with my sister, like my first, okay, she lives with us now. And it's funny because she and I are so close. Like she is like everything to me. Like she would do anything for me, vice versa. Our older sister is kind of the least financially responsible sister that the younger one and I kind of help take care of in some ways. Fantastic relationship. But when I think back about childhood, it's like her and I would wrestle, box, fight like crazy. And so the thought that we're so close now, I tell them everything. We probably talk on the phone, group chat every day, is amazing. Like my sisters are like my ride or die, 100%. And so we have a fantastic relationship, but it was a lot of tension growing up. It was like 3 girls, 1 bathroom, that kind of tension. And just, they're definitely my best friends now. So
What about you, Rupert?
I joke about this all the time. My brother's awesome. Like, I have friends that complain about their brothers, or oh, I don't really talk to my brother, or I talk to you more than my brother. And there's 2 brothers. I talk to both of them all the time, but they never talk to each other, which is odd. And then they'll ask me, do I have the same issues? And I say no, because my brother's David. And then they're like, oh yeah, because all of our friends, some of them may not like me, all of them love my brother, so they tolerate me. And it's been like that since I was 5 till 40. And he always let me play. He never, if he couldn't play, I'm not playing, he'll walk away with him and we'd go play something else. and half the people would leave with my brother. So it was, I don't have any, like, there's no sibling, maybe like a sibling rivalry if we're like in competitions, but this can be anything from checkers to basketball to anything. That's just, we have that issue. Um, we always argue who's the funnier one, who's the, like, little small stuff like that. But when it comes to how we get along and do we fight, do we argue? No. He's the greatest uncle, all my kids are on his 401ks, and his retirement plan is my retirement plan. Like, yeah, this is like, I wish I could say like we fight all the time. And like, I just think I'm very fortunate to have my brother be the person that he is, because he's not really too competitive, or doesn't really have that, like, he doesn't have to be the most macho guy. So it's easy. I love my brother.
I think that, like, what the three of us just shared kind of sums up the complexity of sibling relationships. And so when we do these topics, especially if it's a new topic, I always like to beforehand, read some articles, do a little bit of research. So I'm not just like talking about what I think, I've got some little bit of background knowledge. And so doing and reading, what was interesting when I was looking at articles, sibling relationships, it appears like this is an area that psychologists haven't really studied all that much. And it's like, I kept coming across that, like, this is something that like really hasn't been studied in depth. Like a lot of, childhood development has been studied like intensively, but this one area for whatever reason hasn't. And it makes me think of like how, Yvonne and I, like, we've been doing this is the 5th year that we've been doing these like weekly meetings, and it never occurred to us to do this topic. And so this is something that I think tends to be overlooked with our kids and their development. But we should look at it more. Siblings are people's longest lasting relationships. Like, you have this relationship from early childhood through old age, if you have an average lifespan. And so this is like, your relationship with your sibling is likely going to be the longest relationship of your life. And they are very complex. Your sibling can be your greatest support person, or be the person that you compete most with and you can have a total toxic relationship with. And, everything I've read, talks about how the quality of your sibling relationship has a correlation with mental health and how your mental health develops over your life. And like, do you tend to have problems with depression and anxiety and then substance abuse and all of these things that, like, one commonality that people who do studies have found is that, non-supportive sibling relationships or poor sibling relationships can be a factor in all of that.
That makes so much sense.
I was about to say, do you have thoughts?
It does make a lot of sense. My sisters and I are all very high anxiety. Everyone's had their bouts with depression, and it's interesting because when I talk about my childhood, I always talk about like, oh yeah, I have fantastic parents. They were super supportive. Like, everything was cool. Like, anytime I've been in like therapy in my life, they're like, tell me about your childhood. And I'm like, it was fantastic. It was like, I had my family. They were really supportive. We had enough food, like all the things. And then my sisters will start talking about some of the things that happened. And so the way I'm the middle child, and I'm also kind of what they would call like the goody two shoes of the family. I was the only one to not get kicked out of private school. I was the only one to finish high school when I was supposed to finish high school. And so I always had this, like, I think for my parents, I was kind of the person that was like, okay, we didn't completely screw everything up because you're doing pretty good. Like, that was kind of like the space that I filled for my family. And so I think in that, right, like, it did create a lot of anxiety for me to like do well. And I think that's where I get my instinct to like take care of other people, because I always felt that need to like look out for my sisters. My younger sister, she probably got kicked out of every high school in San Jose. I mean, Del Mar, Andrew Hill, Piedmont. She told me why she got kicked out of Piedmont, and I really hope the records don't stay that long, because like my last name was the same. embarrassing. And so I think for me, it was just kind of that, like, created some anxiety. They'll tell me stories like, oh, I remember that time when, this happened with the younger sister. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, as a social worker, that's really stressful, like, for a family to think that happened. But I think in my mind, I probably blocked a lot of that out. But when I think of it now, it's like, yeah, that's very anxiety provoking. It's kind of like, I do feel a little bit on edge a lot, and it makes sense. So I don't know if that explains your question, or like your theory, but it definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it talked about, especially if the older sibling, when they're teenagers, if they do drugs, if they drink, the younger sibling is more likely to do it because the older sibling will introduce them to it.
Got it.
I know, I remember when I was in high school, my friends and I were going to a Grateful Dead concert. Now, granted, I was in high school in the very early 90s. So we were going to this Grateful Dead concert, and my mom made me take my little brother. And so his first exposure to drugs and not, that lifestyle was through me, because I took him to this Grateful Dead concert. I want to say at my mom's urging. But yeah, I mean, he later got super and had a drug problem. Got kicked out of high school, and definitely.
Oh, that makes sense now, because now I'm having memories of my sister telling my mom she was going to take me out to ice cream, me sitting in the back of her car while she went into her boyfriend's house.
Yeah. So older siblings have this really kind of detrimental influence on the younger siblings. I mean, hopefully not, we would hope not, but that's something as a parent to be aware of and watch out for. I know when I was in high school, I was fully guilty of underage drinking, but how did we get alcohol when I was in high school? It's because somebody had an older brother or sister, and that's how that often is the source. So I'd like to kind of now shift. We've talked about our relationship with our siblings, and we are all parents of multiple children. So our children have siblings. And so how do we navigate this as parents? And so I'd like you guys to share how your children get along with each other. I'll start. So there's the 6-year age gap between my two kids. Growing up, I don't know how close they were because of that age gap. They never really played together all that much, because there was such a large when they were little. When they were both, my daughter was an earlier teenager and my son was more in that tween age, kind of they would say super ugly stuff to each other, a lot of which I was unaware of, and they tell me now some of the stuff they used to say to each other, and I oh my gosh, that's terrible. They are a lot closer now, and it's actually really wonderful and beautiful to see their relationship now, and that they'll talk to each other. And especially for my son, my daughter is somebody that he will open up to, and share how he's feeling about stuff. And so that I'm really super happy to see their relationship progress. I don't think as a parent I had anything to do with that. I think they've totally done this on their own. I don't really think I've had any sort of influence on that. What about you guys?
I think I actually had a lot of influence on the relationship between all of them, and I'll explain a little bit further. But I have 3 boys now. They're 20, 16, and 15. They were super close. My oldest always kind of assumed this responsibility. We used to call him the little dad. He would take care of the babies and, always look out for them. My middle one came when my oldest was about 2.5 and 3.5, 2.5 or 3 anyways. And he really took good care of him and would grab his diapers and do all the things. And so they were really close. When my youngest one was born, my oldest kind of did the same thing. He really was caretaking for him. They have always got along. My kids they're not like big personalities. They're like their dad. They're very stoic. They're very calm. They don't like talk a lot. So like as far as like having good dialogue with one another, I don't think so. But they really get along. And so the part where I think I've really impacted it is when my middle one was in elementary school. He went through some really bad anxiety, and I had to focus a lot of my attention on him. And there became a lot of I don't know if jealousy is the word, but behaviors that were like attention seeking behaviors to get mom's attention back from my middle one. The other part where I think I kind of had to plan it is my third is on the autism spectrum, and I always gave in to him a little bit more easily, let him get away with stuff. He's kind of gotten his way. And so, I would tell him to do chores and he wouldn't. And usually like I'd come down on my other kids. With my younger one, I kind of was very, very passive with him. And it made my other two really resent him and treat him differently and bully him because I was so easy on him. And so I think in that way, I kind of created that dynamic. As they've gotten older, there was a time where the two younger ones did not like each other. Like they're like, I actually hate my brother. And it was so heartbreaking because I actually, when I got pregnant with my third one, it was like, I really wanted my middle one to have someone close in school with him. And so I had all these thoughts and hopes that they'd be so close and just like, walk to school together and this whole fantasy. And so now that they're a little bit older, I'm seeing their relationship. So I don't know if your parents have told you this, but my parents would always say, your sisters are all you have. Right. Like no matter what, no matter when your friends come and go, your spouses may even come and go, like your sisters are all you're going to have when dad and I are gone. And so I've always had that in my head. And so I'm finally to the point with my own boys where I'm like, okay, if that were the case, I think we're going to be okay. I think they're going to be okay. They love each other. They look out for each other. They take care of each other. But getting there was really tough to watch. It was actually really heartbreaking. It would have hurt me, like kind of like you said, like to hear what they said to each other and how they treated each other. But I do think my relationship with them has influenced their relationship with one another. But like, again, like stepping back now and looking in, it's like, oh man, they really do love each other. And I'm so grateful for that.
I'm going to let Rupert go, but then I'm going to circle back to what you just said about what your parents said to you. So Rupert, what about your kids?
My two oldest are 14 and 13, and they are drastically different. One of them is into girls, into his clothes, wants his hair a certain way. The other one is oblivious to girls, still plays tag at school. He runs around and he's I would say he's a little bit immature for his age, and then he's extremely small. One of them's about 5'7", the other one's about 4'9", and they're only 15 months apart. They're drastically different kids. Even to the point where my oldest's friends tease my younger one or tease his group of friends because they're more childish at school for, their middle school's figuring out who you are and like what you're going to be, and like some mature faster than others. Whether that's physically, mentally. I hope my son gets bigger, but right now he's pretty tiny. So we almost are overprotective of him.
Mm-hmm.
Like my oldest can walk the dog or go walk the dog. And he says, why can't my brother walk the dog? And it's like, well, we have a Frenchie, your brother's small. We're worried about either one of them getting taken, like, let alone. So he's like, aren't you worried about me? And it's like, I have less worry. So it's like different worries. And it's like, I'm really super excited you can do 50 push-ups, but like, I'm super excited that your brother has a 4.0. So it's like, and then it's like, well, you like him more because he has a 4.0. And it's like, I don't like either one of you more than the other. I just don't want you to highlight your brother's lowlights when he has a 4.0 and he's one of the smarter kids in his school. So it's always like, I know he plays tag at lunch, but why don't you say, yeah, my brother's also really smart, or he's really nice. He's pure heart. Like he doesn't say anything bad about his brother at all, to the point where it's like, why do you always have to put down your brother?
Yeah.
And he asked me like, well, what about you and your brother? And I go, my brother's Uncle David. And then he's like, oh, like he sees it. I was like, Uncle David wasn't like that the way you are. And that's why I'm not like that with Uncle David. you have to be like, and we try to project how we are on our kids. But that dynamic is totally not the opposite. But it's like your one brother loves the other brother doesn't care for his brother's personality right now.
Mhm.
And when they were playing Skylanders together, and they're on they're the happiest thing when they're Pokemon together, Pokemon Go, and they're going to the things together. But it's like one summer one, has armpit hair, and he's like the king of the castle, right? And yeah, it was like a whole thing. He was like playing with it one day, and it's like, good, what are you doing? Like,
How are they with the younger ones? Because you have two little ones too.
um, my my little one, I have a Gavin as well. So my Gavin loves to hold his brother, loves to hold his sister. Sometimes when they're busy, they don't like to be taken away from their games or their friends, but they don't mind. He doesn't mind helping. My older one doesn't want to do anything. He just wants to like sit in his room and watch videos. I don't even know what he watches, and he only wants to come out to eat and then eat half of the food that's on the table. And like, you know, he's the typical. I think I'm an alpha male kid, and we'll see. He might be a young alpha. I just need to learn how to navigate with him. But they both will do what I asked them to do. My older one, I just have to ask a few more times.
Um, were they like cool when you were like, yeah, we're gonna have more kids? Because there's a big age gap between,
Right. So
you're like, you've got two older ones and two younger ones. How were they when you were like, oh, you're gonna have a brother or sister?
my older one wishes that he was an only child. So he's like, he wished like, oh, it's just him. My little one, he doesn't mind it. He loves being a brother. He was so happy because now he could be a big brother. Like he's always been the little brother so long. Now he's like, now I have a little brother and a little sister, and he has a dog. Like he's the happiest kid ever. My older one is like when am I gonna get my own room? When am I gonna get like this? When am I gonna get like more freedom, more freedom, more freedom? So he has that where we're probably putting too much pressure on him as an older brother already. He
Mhm.
wasn't really too jazzed about it with his little brother, so now he has two more. But I told him he can always join the army if he wants to get away from us.
Okay, I have another question for you guys. And then parents, of course, as always, if you want to join in on the chat, please do so. So Yvonne, you made the comment about your parents said, that your sisters are gonna, I can't remember exactly what you said, but like they're gonna be like
That's all you got.
that's all you got. And it made me think like my like in the role my parents had in like guiding my relationship with my brother. And so my situation growing up, a little unusual. My mom is an only child. That's not unusual, but my mom is an only child. So she didn't have any sort of experience with like siblings and couldn't. And it, like when my brother and I would fight, she used to always make comments like, I wish you guys would just get along, I like, and I think she is somebody that always wanted to have a sibling. And so saw that the fact that we didn't have a close relationship is like painful to her, because it was something that she felt like she had always been lacking in her life, and like we had a sibling and why don't we like them. My dad is the youngest of 13.
Ooh.
And so, but he like, being the youngest and like being born in the 1930s, like his oldest siblings were, adults when he was born. They actually like went and fought in World War II. Like, and so, and then his mom died when he was 6. His dad died when he was like 12. And so he was actually raised by one of his sisters, or his only sister. Is actually all boys. There was one girl. I know, crazy. And so he like, it's just really interesting that like his relationship with his siblings, he became closer to some of his brothers as an adult and like later adult. But like growing up, I don't think there was really any sort of like sibling type of, I mean, I guess when he did live with his sister, because she had 2 daughters that were really his nieces, but I think probably their relationship was more sibling like, and because he was close, much closer to age than them. So just, I think growing up, my parents didn't really have a lot, and the point I'm trying to make is they didn't really have a lot of knowledge themselves about how to navigate sibling relationships. And so they just kind of left my brother and I to do our thing, which was not good. And then I like made me think about how I've navigated and taught my kids about sibling relationships, which I don't think I really have. It's not something that I've really focused on. And so I'm curious to you guys with like the role you feel like your parents had in like helping shape your relationships. Cause I want to like where I'm like steering this conversation is I want to get us to the point where we can, give some advice on like, how do you help your kids with their sibling relationships?
My mom was an only child. Her parents were like significantly older. And she was really spoiled. Didn't really have that dynamic, with anybody. Didn't even have like close cousins or anything like that. My dad has 2 brothers and 4 sisters, and they were very much involved in one another's lives. And even now, like my aunts are like in all of my business and all of the things. And so my dad was really bullied by his older brother. And so one of the things that I think that's done for me is my dad has he has a lot of expectations for my boys, and he was kind of hard on them, and he was very passive with my niece. So my grandpa and his older brother were all kind of very rough and like boys have to be tough and they don't cry and all these things. So my dad kind of treated my boys like that, but then my niece, he was like a princess. My mom, on the other hand, her mom was very kind of firm with her to like get stuff done and do stuff. And so she's very hard on my niece, and my boys could do no wrong. Like my mom, the joke we make with my mom is no matter what I've called her to tell her that my boys have done bad, suspended, whatever, my mom's comment is always, quote, boys will be boys. Had my niece done it would have been different. And my dad is like totally the opposite. And so I think, watching them with their relationships, it's like, I actually wanted to make sure that my boys didn't have relationships like that with one another. Like I wanted to make sure that my boys could talk about their feelings and feel their feelings and all of these things. And so that actually caused a lot of tension between my dad and I. My dad was living with us for a while, and my dad's like the nicest guy, by the way, but he was just so tough on them. And I finally had to like check my dad, like, I said, just because your brother was a jerk doesn't mean that you get to do that to my kids. Like that, I remember this conversation, and from that day forward, it's been very smooth. But I think how you were raised and what you were exposed to like really does shape how you treat others, what your expectations are of them. And so, his relationship with his family really did, it was like attempting to impact mine, but I had to like, kind of put my foot down on that one. So interesting, but yeah, definitely gender differences with my parents, with expectations and how they treated one another. And I never wanted that from my kiddos. So that's kind of where we landed.
What about you, Rupert?
I don't know. Maybe that's why I don't know how to skip. Like I was telling Jenny the other day, I don't know. I saw one of the kids skipping, and I was like, I don't know how to skip. And I don't know if that was something like, was I skipping as a child and someone said, hey, boys don't skip, or why are you skipping? And now I don't know how to. And
Interesting.
it's one of those things. I wasn't raised with my dad, so I couldn't say it was something like that, but I had a lot of uncles, and all of them were like my positive male role models were probably my aunts. Like I had no, or my friends that were, at the oldest, maybe 6 to 8 years older, and anywhere in between. I grew up with a lot of males on my street, and we all grew up together. And we all, like, I would say 40 of us, 50 of us legit lived on the same corner to corner. at any given time, and from like mid 70s to 2000s when everything started to bubble and everybody started to go to the valley and stuff. So for a large portion of my youth, it was like other boys raised, like, just having that older brother type. um but I do remember the same thing, like people that were my mom's age or my that would be my dad's age were more like, boys don't do this, boys do that. And I don't do that with my own kids. I kind of, like, if you want to wear that, you can wear that. If you want to do that, like, you know I might say something to my wife, like, oh, like, it's never extreme, like I wanted a Barbie. It's like,
Yeah.
can I have those pink shorts or those pink shoes? And it's like, I wear pink shorts and I wear pink shoes, so yeah. But I also do some of those, I'm more outlandish with my style choices, because I was pigeonholed so much as a child of what boys wore and what boys do. And that could have just been generation. It could have been just our culture. I think it's a little bit of both sometimes, and definitely where I was raised. Um, but I try not to do that with my own kids, um, just based off the fact that I don't know who they're going to be, and I don't want them to see that I'm saying something, like, if I say something, it might ruin their dynamic, because it might be, well, dad said, boys don't do this, or this is a gender norm for us. So it's where it's like, no, I accept both of them equally as siblings. I hope that they um, don't get that vibe, because as a male, it's really hard. It's really hard to. I don't want to say we're judged more, but we are more um, definitive in the way we say things. And I think for children, it could be. And sometimes I may not look like the person who is more open. I'm. I tend to not have any kind of biases towards children, even my own, even the 2000 that we have here. But I would look like I would. And I get that a lot. I get that I'm not really the more, I get told, if, like, if you smile a lot more, you look like you're more nicer than you are, or you would appear as nicer as you appear, or however I'm trying to say that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I definitely do think our my mom is the spoiledest one out of all her children, all her siblings. My mom's siblings are 10 to 14 years older than she is. So she gets everything that she wants. And she's even like to the point where she's a spoiled 66-year-old. And she expects things, and like her older siblings still do stuff. I'll still get a call from one of my uncles and like, what did you tell your mom? And it's like, what did she tell you? Like, I want, and then he's like, how your mom can be, just leave her alone. You're gonna have to, like, you're gonna need to apologize on this one. And he's 80. And it's like, no,
It doesn't change, right?
right? Yeah, I think you need to tell your sister she's wrong. And it's like, no, I think, like, for better for everybody if you just, like, he's tired of the phone call, so he's gonna make that
Yeah.
one phone call to me. Uh,
Ugh.
but I hope that maybe Gavin will do that for Gia in 14 years.
Right,
Because when they get older, they're gonna be drastically apart as well.
oh,
Um,
God.
but yeah, just to wrap it back up, I don't know how to skip.
Okay. I told
That's where I
Rupert
was
the
going
other
with
day that
that.
I could teach him, but he'd have to
Yeah.
be ready for me to teach him.
I will video it.
I think I have to be mentally
For
and
sure.
physically ready.
So I came across like 4 pieces of advice for parents on how to promote like positive sibling relationships for our kids. The first one is avoid behavior that can be seen as favoring one child. And wow, that's hard.
It's
And
fine,
so,
like, who's my mom's favorite, like that kind of thing.
well, and so I really went into it, and like, obviously, like, as a parent, you're like, no, I don't have a favorite child. That's ridiculous. But it's things like, do you have different rules for different kids? Like you allow one kid to do something, but you're not going to allow the other kid to do that. And sometimes that may be totally legitimate based on like your kids and their needs, but you have to be prepared for a good explanation and explain why you have different rules. Like that was like the clear thing of like, explain why you have different rules so that they understand that, so that they don't perceive, because all of this is like really comes down to what the kids are perceiving and perceiving that my parent likes this kid better. They allow them to do that. And I can know like this, and honestly, I feel like this is like, I look back and I'm reading this, and then I was like examining my relationship with my brother and like why we as adults have a difficult relationship. I'm the oldest. I am the one that I've talked about, my parents are older. They require a lot of care right now. I'm the one that's doing it. Now, granted, I live a block away from them. My brother lives an hour and a half away, but I just feel like I pick up the slack, and I feel like that's a resentment I've had my whole life. My brother barely graduated from high school. I like graduated with no problem. I went straight to a 4-year college. I graduated from a 4-year college in 4 years. I went straight to graduate school, got my master's degree, where my brother took 9 years to graduate from college. But it seems like every compliment my brother, they're always like, oh, look what Jeffrey did. Oh my gosh, it's so wonderful. And I'm like, but look what everything I did. Like, where's my stuff? Like, it's like kind of like, I've always felt like, oh, Jenny's the good one. She's like, we just expect that of her. And like, I still feel like that as an adult, like my parents wouldn't think to ask my brother for help. But like right before I got on this Zoom, my dad's calling me, you gotta order me this, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's like, why aren't you calling my brother and asking him to do that? No, it like falls on me. And I just feel like, and it made me think about this, like, and how I perceive things that like, and how my parents acted when we were growing up, and like now, like how that bleeds into my relationships. And I'm sure my brother has the same, like he could have the same complaints, but just in a different way, right? Like they never put pressure on Ginny. Like Ginny always, they never like, like she was always the good one. She was the goody two shoe. She never got into trouble. They always, they liked her more. They never yelled at her. I'm sure that he can say the same like type of complaints. And so the advice is think about that as when you're parenting. And if you're treating your kids differently in any way, acknowledge it and talk to your kids about it. Yvonne, you have these faces that you're like, oh my God.
That like hit me hard because I'm like, I wouldn't even have an explanation of why my little Gavin gets to do whatever he wants. Like, I mean, what? Like, oh, he has autism, but like, you, like what? Like, I can't, that's not an excuse. But I mean, with him, my kids over the years have been like, really, you're not going to ground him? Really, you're not going to this and that? And, just yesterday I was in his IEP and in the notes, it said, this teacher had to ask Gavin 3 times to put his phone away. So I'm telling this to my husband yesterday, and my older one walks by and he's like, why does he still have his phone? And I'm like, literally, like, because my other 2, oh no, and I was like, well, I walked him over to the teacher and made him apologize. And my son's like, and he still has his phone. He's like, if that were me, you would have taken my phone, hit it with the sledgehammer, and that would have been the end of it. And I'm like, you're right. Like, I don't even know what to say right now. So now I'm like backtracking.
Everybody, we're getting real with the parenting moments right now.
I was like, I don't have a reason. You know what it was? It's like, when he was little, it was like, I just don't want to hear Gavin cry. Give it to him. Let him do whatever he wants. I don't want to hear it. And they still resent me for it. And they're not wrong. So I don't have an excuse. Dang.
Sorry.
So,
go ahead, Rupert.
Before Mr. Vanderzee became our superintendent, he used to lead a lot of the meetings that we used to do. And he would always start with the 3 bullet points. I use that with my kids. I say, we have to take him as he is. We identify his strengths and weaknesses. And then we figure out how we use those strengths and weaknesses to like that's how I treat him. So if one is smaller, he's smaller. So he's going to do the lower level, lower to the ground jobs, stuff that requires muscles and stuff. Like that's your gig. So like, and
like the garbage is too heavy for him to take out like that.
We stick to those 3 bullet points. They don't know it's like the East Side. I'm blanking, but it's the East Side way, right? Like
East Side
how
Common
we
Assurances.
yeah, those are the common assurances that we will provide your students. And it's even, I even told them it applies to your parents. So your parents have strengths and weaknesses. If I end up doing something that your mom doesn't do, it's not because your mom can't do it. It might be something that I can do better. And it's vice versa. And then when I try to tell my wife that, she's like, that's just some bull crap. Like, and it's like, no,
She's like,
it's the
really?
way of, yeah,
What
like
can you do better
it's
than
real.
me?
It's real. My wife doesn't like there's no rules for that, right? That's a lose lose. But for this one, like for my kids, they don't know I'm using the East Side Common Assurances on them. You guys should try that.
I like that. I like that. And I'm actually going to tell that to Glenn Vanderzee that you use that. He's going to love that.
Well, 'cause
so,
I'm a stickler for that. I always say like that's the hardest one is getting past bullet point one.
yeah,
And
that's
once you get,
awesome.
but it's my own kid, so I only have
Welcome
two,
them
right?
as
Oh, I
they
have
are.
four.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So my second piece of advice for parents is don't compare siblings or set them up to compete with each other. So making comments like, oh, I think Yvonne froze. um, so making comments like, why can't you be more like your sister? Why can't you act like your brother? When your brother was in school, this is how he did that, or, that sort of thing. That's kind of common sense, but I think as parents, we have moments of frustration that stuff like that can slip out. And so that's like setting up, and definitely that is something that I have seen in my role as principal, where I've had parents be like, oh, I never had these problems with their sister, or I never had the problems with the brother, and so just remember that every kid is different and every kid is going to do their own thing and be their own way, and try not to compare them. And it can be hard, but as much as you can, avoid doing that. I think we lost Yvonne. We'll see if she comes back. Third piece of advice, and this is one that like I definitely, when I was reading this, like, oh, I failed on that. Coach them on how to get along. Don't let them just sort it out on their own. So when they are fighting, and well, before I go deeper into that, Jay says, I tried that once. I asked my son why he couldn't be more like his older sister. And he only said because she set the bar too high. Oh, Jay. Yeah. Feel that. Like, yeah, like that's a lot for kids. Like when they have an older sibling that's been super successful with stuff, to like try to live up to that. But you gotta like, each kid is their own person. And so like having them like do their own thing, and just acknowledging what they're uniquely good at themselves, that's the best thing to do. Welcome back, Yvonne.
Thank you.
All right. So coach them on how to get along, not just let them sort it out. So this is a mistake I made when my kids were fighting. I'm like, I'll just figure it out. Or like stop talking to each other. No, you got to like actually give them some advice on how to communicate. Our topic next week is family communication. And so we'll dig deeper into this point next week on how to communicate as a family. But don't just expect that they're going to figure it out, because if they figure it out on their own, they're probably not going to do it in the best way. And not to put any pressure on you as a parent, but like they're like, again, this is their longest relationship in their life. And so
you just like totally triggered the craziest memory for me. So back long time ago, we lived downtown and we lived on a pretty busy street. And when we would fight, my mom would kick us out onto the porch and she wouldn't let us in until we would hug. That was like how she, like, you have to figure it out. We would be out there in our pajamas all day long. We would not. And then finally, like somebody would have to use the bathroom or somebody have to eat, and then we would hug. And my mom would look out the window and she would count to make sure we hugged for 3 seconds. And I just had this memory and I'm like, oh my gosh, my mom was like trying to get us to get along. It was like embarrassing. We're out on the street wearing nightgowns, like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she was really trying to do that. I've actually done it a few times with my boys. I'm not like the same as my mom was, but I'm like, oh my gosh, you just totally, I don't know why you just triggered that memory in my head, and it's hilarious. I'm like, wow. And I remember being out there a lot, and we were so stubborn that we would just stay out there. Like, nobody's gonna initiate that hug, you know? So it's like, I don't know. I just had that
Oh,
thought. The other thing in response to the last one that you said, I can't remember exactly what you said. About comparing siblings.
siblings, yeah.
I have this narrative, and my kids have probably heard me say it, of like, with number one and number two, I honestly, they were school was easy for both of them. They were always ahead in the class. They didn't have to put a lot of effort. And so I thought I was like mother of the year because I taught them how to read, and that's why. Number three comes along, and it has been an absolute nightmare to get them to do homework, to get them to care, to like the whole thing. And I know that he probably hears me say that, like, and he probably feels bad about it, you know? It's like, oh, school's been so easy for, you know, for the others, and for you, it's just been like, that's awful for him to feel like, oh gosh, school doesn't come easily for me. And that's a frustration of my mom's. It makes her look like a bad mom. Like, that's what I'm telling him, right? Um, so yeah, comparing siblings, and
you just triggered a memory for me.
Oh no.
So like, my advice, like, not only be careful what you say to your kids, be careful about what you say about your kids to other people, because you never know when your kids are listening. I distinctly remember, like, when I was growing up, my mom was on the telephone, and so I could only hear her side of the conversation.
Oh,
and she didn't know I was listening, obviously, but you know, like, I was in the next room, and you know how like you eavesdrop on your parents. And I just remember her saying to whoever she was talking to, some friend of hers, about my brother, and like, oh, Jeffrey's just naturally smart. Ginny has to work harder at school. And that has stuck with me my whole life, about like, oh, my mom thinks I'm not naturally smart. And like, now I've gotten over it. I think I'm probably actually way smarter than my brother, but growing up and like in school, like that, like it really like was something that I had to, like, it was just there in my mind. It was hard. Yeah. Okay. So my final, because we're actually coming up to our end. So my final piece of advice, and this is kind of like something that we've talked about a lot, and this again will connect with what we're talking about next week with family communication. But as much as you can, plan shared family activities that you're forcing your kids to spend time with each other. And in ways that they have to interact with each other. So if you can, like, especially now, doing things where they aren't going to have devices, if you can have a family rule that like, hey, we're going to do a family game night or something like that, we're going to play a board game and there's no devices, and your kids are like willing to do that, great. If they're not willing to do that, I fully recommend like pulling the router and pretending like the internet went out, and just being like, oh, we're going to have to call Comcast, don't know what's going on. And so like force it, like, you know, just pretend like you guys can do that as parents. And, you know, just do something, because the kids now, they're like on their phones, and you can have like, you can go on a family trip, but then they're just like on their own devices. Like, I know my kids, we went to Hawaii over Christmas, and they shared a room together, and they were just like doing their own thing and on their own devices the whole time. I don't know how much they actually talked to each other. I think they did a little bit, but that doesn't, like, if they're just like on their own devices next to each other, that doesn't count. They need to be interacting with each other. So
sometimes they're playing with each, yeah, there's sometimes they play games together.
yeah, so as much as like where they are like talking to each other, and so planning as a parent, planning activities where you're forcing them to do that, is one thing my family likes to do. We like to go camping where there's no internet. And so they're actually, and that's where, like, you know, in the evening, because we play games together, because that's all there is to do. So that's a great thing to do, especially this summer. This is why I like to do these topics, and like the family communication topic, we actually do at the end of the year, because summer is a great time, because you don't have the school pressures and all of the commitments and time, and you just have more time during the summer. So that's a great time to work on all of that. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up because I have to take my son to the doctor. So hopefully all of you found this helpful. We will return to this topic next year. I found this topic fascinating. And so hopefully.
You got me doing a lot of reflecting.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll see when we talk about this again, how our reflection or like self-reflection, how that pans out. But thank you everybody for joining in. Like I said, our topic next week is family communication. So hopefully you will look forward to that. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Okay. Thank you, everyone.